Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today we are going to be talking about the Swamp Fox Blade. This is a 1X prism optic that is pretty cool for what it is. This is the first prism optic that I've ever really played around with. Now I do want to say that I paid for this with my own money. I bought this from Optics Planet for like $220-ish about 3 months ago, and I've been testing it ever since. I don't have any relationship with Swamp Fox Optics at all. I have reviewed a couple of their scopes in the past. They commented on one of my videos and I've sent them one Instagram message, but that is the entirety of that relationship. So as we already mentioned, it is a 1X prism optic. It is technically a 1x25, so it gives you a pretty close approximation of 1X, though again you are looking through many pieces of curved glass, so you're not actually seeing a true 1X image or a unmodified image as you're bending light through a lot of different pieces of glass. Now, let's get some basic features out of the way. The price is anywhere from $200 on a good day all the way up to about $250, $240 is their MSRP. For a prism style optic, that is pretty good for the mid-range. I know Primary Arms has some other 1X optics that are, again, they fall right into that price range, maybe plus or minus a few dollars. In terms of size and weight, it is a bit of a chunky boy. It's around 13.9, it's like 14 ounces basically, which is slightly heavier than the 11-ounce EOTech 512. It's also slightly longer, as you can tell. This is a little bit lighter though. It does boast a 3,000 hour battery life in this model. This is the green model. They actually offer green, red, and amber illumination, which can benefit some people, or they have some spiel about that. But there are different reticle options for the illumination. This one here is the green setting, which has worked very, very well, save for one thing. I will say that it is 100% daylight bright, especially on the top setting. Generally speaking, I have it on the top setting, -1 when I'm like under tree cover or anything like that, because I don't need it quite that bright. And it is, of course, a etched reticle. So it is etched onto the glass itself. So even if the battery was to theoretically go out on you, even though it probably won't, we'll get into that in a little while, you do still have a reticle. Now, we might as well just talk about the reticle. It is a ballistic rise compensation reticle, not a ballistic drop compensated reticle, a ballistic rise compensated reticle. So that means that it gives you your holdovers for 5, 10, 15, or 5, 10, 25, and 50 yards. Now, they do recommend a 50-yard zero with this. So with a 50-yard zero, you have basically a donut of death like an EOTech with the bottom hash mark. That is your hold at 5 yards. Now, I went ahead and just tested the bottom two, because at 25 yards, your hold, between 25 and 50, there's basically no difference in point of impact shift. It's like an inch, but you're at 25 yards, so it's not that big of a deal. I did test it at 5 yards in a 1-inch circle and put 3 rounds in a 1-inch circle that I was aiming for using that bottom hash mark. And then the dot below your chevron, I'll put a picture of the reticle on the screen for you. The dot below that, that is your 10-yard hold. So then backed up to 10 yards, did another 3 rounds, put them all in the 1-inch circle. So this is using the ballistic rise compensator within the reticle. So the first 3 rounds right in there were at 5 yards, back up to 10, use the dot for the 10-yard zero, and then you have like the 25 or whatever, but it's so close to the 50 that it really doesn't matter. But 5 and 10 yards, absolutely accurate, does work. This is a 1-inch circle. So the ballistic rise compensated reticle does absolutely work as intended. Now, it's a 1X optic. It's a 1X prism, so it's not really designed for long range or even medium range. It's more of an up-close style option. So they didn't go into putting in a ballistic drop compensation, because you're probably not going to be shooting it out to those extended distances. However, since it is a prism optic with a center chevron, which comes to a fine triangular point, it is much more precise than your standard red dot or even like an EOTech, because it does come to that fine point, that point of infinite precision. So I was able to take this optic out to 300 yards, no issue. Now, when you're talking about a 5.56 16-inch gun that I did it with that PSA Classic one. I think you guys might be able to see it, might be off frame back there. But I did it with that gun at 300 yards. Basically, I was using the bottom part of the chevron at 300 yards. So you can definitely take it out to 300, probably 400, though at 400 yards, your hold is probably going to be in between the dot below and the bottom of the chevron. So inside of 300 yards, incredibly easy to use, much easier to use than a red dot, because it is, of course, course, a little bit more precise than your blooming out red dot if you have it a little bit too bright, because of course the etched reticle doesn't really change size. So in my opinion, even though it is designed as a up close option, and the reticle is designed and built around that up close ballistic rise compensation, which does of course work as I tested, but it's also usable out to 300 yards, no problem. Though again, not perfectly ideal, especially if you're shooting at smaller targets or targets that you can't see very well. So the reticle does work exactly as intended, and it is very flexible in my opinion. Now, having those really up close holds isn't really important for the average person, as you're probably not going to be finding yourself in like a hostage situation anytime soon. But if you're using it for competition or just shooting targets up close to speed and then transitioning to longer targets, say you're going from a 5-yard target to a 50-yard target and you want to be hitting in a very precise area, you can use the different parts of the reticle to make sure that you're hitting very precisely at whatever distance you are in between 0 and 50 yards. So I do really like that about the reticle, but no matter how good or bad the reticle is, it doesn't matter if you can't see through the glass. So we're going to talk about eye box. So eye box is basically how much left or right play you get before you can no longer see and use that reticle. Now, this is a 1x prism optic. They advertise the eye relief at 3.6 inches. However, that's not exactly true. The eye relief is anywhere from 1 inch to 15 or so. So quite a bit of eye relief on it. Pretty much as good as a red dot. The only disadvantage is if you were using a red dot out like this far, I still can see the reticle and a very small section through the glass, but it's not ideal. So that's the one situation where a red dot would actually be better. On top of that, the side to side is, and up and down, is fairly incredible. So here's a Holosun 503CU, fairly nifty little red dot. And you get about 90% as forgiving of an eye box on the blade as you do on this one. And I'm not really sure exactly how they managed to do that, but you literally have probably like 1.5 inches, 2 inches left and right up and down when it's in its optimal spot, where you can still see that reticle. So even if you have it weird posted up on a door jamb or underneath a car, if you can just barely get this eye, whatever your dominant eye is, behind the glass, you're going to be able to see that reticle. Even though if you have some scope shadow, you should still be able to hit your target using the Bindon aiming concept. So overall, the eye box eye relief is fairly excellent. Now, something that does not get mentioned enough when you're talking about prism or LPVO style of optics is that depending on where you set it up, it's going to change how the image appears. So for instance, when I bring the glass all the way up to my eye, the image within the glass gets larger. It seems to have more of a magnified effect. Well, if I push it out further on whatever I'm putting it on, whether it's rail or something like that, the image within the glass gets smaller. Now, not a big deal if you're just shooting there at one target, but depending on where you put this on the rail, it can kind of throw you off a little bit, and everybody's eyes are probably slightly different. But for me, I found that putting it at about that 3.5 inches, so basically in the center of the rail for a comfortable eye relief for me, gave it the closest 1x approximation. For instance, if I push this all the way forward like I do with some of my red dots, then the image gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then as I'm transitioning, it looks more warping because it's kind of going from what I see in my right eye and my periphery into a much smaller condensed image within the glass. So something you don't want to be doing is you don't want to be pushing it so far away or having it super close to your eye, because if I push it super close, then everything looks a little bit larger, and as I'm transitioning, everything starts to look a little bit funky if I'm staying in the glass. Now that's for transitions and stuff like that. So basically what you want to do to set it up for the proper eye relief is to figure out where it is for your eye that it looks the closest approximation to 0 or to no magnification whatsoever, and then set it there on the rail, and that's going to make it easier for you to transition, pick up targets, and all that sort of fun stuff. Now, talking about all of that, let's go ahead and talk about the glass quality. So the glass quality, I would say, is basically on par with every Chinesium style optic within this price point. For instance, the Arrowheads, your Strike Eagles, and different LPVOs within the $300 to $400 or $250 to $400 price point basically all have identical looking glass on 1x. What I mean by that is they all have good light transmission, some a little bit better than others. Most of them have fairly good field of views. The color is fine. They're not crazy bright and they're not crazy crisp like when you get up higher end like Trijicon and stuff like that. But for what they are 100% usable, and again, I can take shots at 0 yards or I can take shots at 300 yards with this, no problems whatsoever. So the glass is definitely good, or good enough I should say, but it's nothing spectacular. Now it does have an incredible field of view, so when you have this set up properly and you're transitioning, it looks like you're not looking through something. Like with a lot of LPVOs, you can kind of get that tube effect, like you're looking through a paper towel or something like that. With this, you really don't get that, and that's probably due to its short nature. But transitioning or just pulling it up to your eye, you basically do not lose any of your field of view whatsoever, which is very, very cool and helps to add to that kind of 1x effect, even though it's again not an actual 1x optic. So with all of that being said, the glass, the reticle, the illumination, the eye box, all of that is either good or great, with one exception. And that exception is you get some obnoxious green haze inside of the optic when you use anything higher than the minimal brightness setting for your application, whether that's indoors or outdoors, and when you don't have the Swamp Fox blade in the perfect position. So what I mean by that is right now it's on not the top setting, but about 2 down from the top setting, and I have green haze over the entire optic. It is too bright, so you get that illumination when it's too hot, starts to bleed out into the rest of the image, and I'll show you guys pictures of all of this sort of stuff. And so that can be kind of obnoxious because it takes what is fairly decent glass, like I've mentioned, and turns it into subpar green tinted glass. Now, even indoors, when you have it on a minimal setting, you're gonna have some green tint to your image unless you have the optic in the absolute perfect position. So even when I'm outdoors, generally speaking, what I'm doing is I'm running, when it's perfectly bright outside, I'm using the top setting -1, and then when I'm indoors, I'm either having it completely off or on setting like 1 or 2, just something to give me enough contrast to where I can pick up the dot versus something that's a little bit darker. So while I really like the illumination, and it is definitely daylight bright, I don't like the fact that it bleeds into the rest of the image. Now, this could be an issue with my specific optic, or it could be an issue with the green illumination setting in general. Because of course I only have the green one, I have not tested the red or the amber. It could have to do with some sort of light filter that they're putting on their optics that does not cut out the green light very well, so it gets it to bleed a little bit more than it should. But you are gonna get some of that green shadow, that green fuzz all over your image if you have it on anything higher than what you absolutely need. So my recommendation with it, because of course it does have that etched reticle, is to use it on just barely above what you need to have it have some sort of advantage for you. Something that I haven't mentioned yet that I should is that this does have 3,000 hours of battery life, which is about 3 months. Now I believe that's at more of a medium setting, so it's going to be somewhere less than that. But it's also combined with shake and wake is what they call it, because technically the MOTAC is like a copyrighted term or something like that. But anyways, what that means is that when you pick it up, it will wake up, and it is good enough that I have never noticed it. Now it has a 4-minute auto on, auto off time. Now if you're using it, it's never going to turn off on you because any sort of motion whatsoever will get it to turn on. So when you combine that with a 3,000-ish hour battery life, what that means is that you're going to get about 3 months of use time out of it, not 3 months of runtime overall, usage time on the optic. So for what it's worth, the battery life, though does not sound that high, is actually quite good because it's only on when you need it to be or when you touch it or move it around, and it of course does have that etched reticle, so it actually really never goes off in a situation where you don't need the illumination. Now going back to size and weight and construction for just a minute, it is a large optic when you compare it to like micro red dots and stuff like that are pretty standard on most rifles, pistols, carbines, that sort of thing. But when you compare it to other optics, you know, LPVOs or other scopes, it is still quite small. It's about half the length of your standard LPVO and about half the weight when you include the weight of the LPVO mount. Now, this does come with a standard co-indersite mount that is built into it, so you cannot switch it out for anything else, and that is nice for durability because it's very, very strong. It is a hunk of 6061 aluminum, I believe, hard coat anodized in this nice black color. Looks really good, and it is good enough, though generally speaking, when I was running it, I did not like it at the 1.5 height mount that it is at. So generally speaking, I was running it on a 1/2 inch riser. And because there is no alternative mounting options for it, because it is a solid unit, you need to use some sort of riser or something else to get it up into a more natural, more comfortable head position. So 99% of the time I was using this on a 1/2 inch riser, so bringing it up to around the 2 inch mark, which is a lot more comfortable for me, and I'm not even a tall person. Now, the mount is quite good. It is very, very strong, of course. So you have your two steel, I believe they're steel anyways, of your bolts to tighten it down to lock it into your rail, and then you also have 2 squared recoil lugs on the bottom of your optic so that it mates up really well to your upper receiver and theoretically provides a very knock resistant mounting solution that's not going to shift or move around on you. While it is very tanky, it seems very high quality. They even include crush washers on your bolts to provide more even tension, I believe. I did have some shift in zero. So every optic that I test gets a double drop test. This one here actually got 4. The reason it got 4 was because I did a double drop test on my 1/2 inch riser, and I got about 2 inches of shift at 50 yards. So that is a 4 MOA shift, which is fairly aggressive. But I was using it on a riser, so I needed to retest it again without the riser. And without the riser, I got a little bit less than 1 inch of shift of zero at 50 yards, which means it's under 2 MOA of overall shift after double drop test. Of course, the optic is perfectly fine. There's no issues with it. It does have some scrapes and scuffs on it, that sort of thing, but internally it's perfectly fine. But there was shift in zero multiple times over 4 drops, so in total it shifted about 3 MOA, though of course I re-zeroed it after each drop. So there is some shift in zero. I don't think it's going to hold zero on you if you give it a nasty fall. Now, my drop tests are fairly similar, though they're not scientific, depending on where I am. Generally speaking, it is 2 shoulder height drops, one on the top of the optic, one on the side of the optic while it's attached to whatever gun I happen to be shooting that day, so there is a big variable there. Generally speaking, I drop it onto gravel or rocks with 2 layers of tarp to kind of give it a little bit of cushion, though not a ton of cushion because it is just a couple layers of tarp. So not the hardest test, not something like Sage Dynamics does to his optics that he tests, but it is something just to see if it takes a pretty sizable knock, is it going to shift zero? And the answer with this optic in my testing is yes. Though, again, when it was used by itself, it was under 2 MOA of shift, so even if you were taking shots at 100 or 200 yards, depending on the size of your target, you should still be on target or very, very close. Now, on top of the drop test that I did, I also shot this on about 8 different guns, 10.5s, 12.5s, 16-inch guns. I also shot this on a couple 7.62 by 39 uppers. Both of those are 10.5-inch uppers. I also put about 1.5 boxes on that shotgun that you see behind me, that G-Force G12 AR, whatever they call it, shotgun. Wasn't quite running right, not quite through its break-in period yet, but I did put about 1.5 boxes of 12 gauge through this as well. So in total, the round count is around 1,000 rounds, which is fairly expensive to do right now. But it's around 1,000 rounds combined of 5.56, 7.62 by 39, and 12 gauge. Overall, it has held up exceptionally well, and they do market this optic to like law enforcement and professional type users, and it's definitely tanky enough in terms of, I think they rate it to something like 1,100 or 1,200 Gs, which is quite a bit. That is more than enough for shotguns and other things like that that have a very sharp recoil impulse. The only thing that I would say that is kind of a downside is that it does seem to shift zero when it is dropped onto a hard surface from any sort of construction. Again, it's all 6061 aluminum. It's pretty much excellent. There's good knurling on everything. You have your rubberized buttons up top. It is IPX7 waterproof, I believe, or water resistant. Now, one thing that is kind of obnoxious, but only going to be obnoxious for me, is they do have these very nice capped turrets that have really good knurling on the knobs. They're also captured, so they're captured on this metal piece of wire that holds them together, so you're never going to lose them, which I have lost caps before, so that is kind of a nice feature. The thing I don't like about them is that for me, because I have put this on so many different guns, so many different mounts, I've had to re-zero it quite a bit, and they just have a ton of threads to get them on and off. So that is a very minor gripe for me, who has put them on a lot of different guns. Now, it does also come with a kill flash from the front, never really used it. And it also comes with lens covers. Again, never really used that either. The clicks on the shirts themselves are actually pretty good. It's fairly easy to zero, and it is fairly accurate to get zeroed. It does use half MOA adjustments, so which is for a 1x optic is very, very precise, more than precise enough to get you onto targets within a reasonable distance, 300-400 yards, that sort of thing. Something I haven't mentioned is that it does use a AA battery, I believe, which is pretty awesome for that 3,000 hour battery life. I do like the fact that it uses a very simple, very standardized battery that basically everyone has, and it is integrated within the mount itself. Sorry, actually checking it right now, it actually uses CR123A, which was included with it from them. So overall, the optic has performed exceptionally well where it's supposed to. But now we're going to talk about some of the downsides and some of the things that I think make it a worse option for most people than certain other optics that are on the market. Now, it is a 1x prism with a good reticle that allows you to use it from point blank range all the way out to about 300 yards. There's some gap there that you don't really get with a red dot. There is some warping around the edges of some red dots, but it is much more noticeable through any sort of prism optic. However, in lots of my videos, I get people asking me, hey, whenever I talk about a red dot, it's like, hey, is it good with an astigmatism? For me, I don't know. I have pretty much the best vision out there. I have 20/10 vision in my right eye, and I do not have an astigmatism, so every red dot that I've ever looked at looks pretty much crystal clear. But if you do have an astigmatism and you want something that is going to absolutely rock at close ranges, what you're going to need is something like a prism. Now, this is about $250, somewhere in that price point. So it is a little bit above what the standard red dots are going to cost you, like the Romeo 5, which are like the really good budget entry line, the Vortex, the Vortex Crossfire, or the Holosuns 403B, I believe. Really good budget red dots are going to be about 50 to 75 bucks cheaper most of the time. But if you have an astigmatism and you need an etched reticle that versus, you know, a projected red dot, which is going to look like a star to you, and you want something that is a lot more precise, still tanky, this is a good option. It's definitely a option, but I'm not sure if it is the best option for most people. Even for myself, I consider it fairly close to the Strike Eagle 1 image. It's not a 1x image, so you still do get that warping, so it's still a little bit slower to pick up than a red dot. It's still a little bit more difficult to transition with. It's also, again, quite a bit heavier. So for most people, I would probably recommend either getting a red dot or getting an LPVO versus getting a prism optic or a 1x prism optic. Now, I think that there is a lot of value in a fixed magnification prism optic, you know, like the ACOGs or something like that, where you get anywhere from 3 to 6 magnification in a very small, very lightweight package, and then you're using like an offset red dot or something like that. I think there's a lot of value in those. For the 1x, it is much more limited in its use case because, again, it needs to be really good up close. However, most red dots are better up close, and so unless you have an astigmatism, there's no reason to go with this over like any of the micro red dots on the market. Now, something that I haven't mentioned that's not a downside of this optic in particular, it's more of a downside of prism or magnified optics in general, is that you can't really run backup iron sights with it. Now, if you have a front sight post, you definitely can see it through the glass. However, it looks a little funky, of course, because it's so close to the glass. It looks pretty warped, and I'm pretty sure it would not be on target, but you will not be able to co-witness your backup iron sights through this. So that means you either need to have a offset set of iron sights or an offset red dot. So if you need a backup optic to your main optic, you're pretty much stuck with either going with a red dot, which is actually better at close range anyway, so you should probably just go with the red dot in the first place, or backup offset iron sights, which there's not a ton of really good ones out there, and I don't really recommend backup 45-degree offset iron sights unless you really need them for your specific build or application. But again, that is just some of the issues that arise when using a prism or a LPVO or something like that, is that you're going to have to use basically something offset to actually be able to see through them when you have something that is not a true 1x mounted to your gun. So again, even when comparing it to a red dot in its basically identical price point. This is the 503CU, as I mentioned before, has the circle dot reticle, the 65 MOA circle, so it still has that hold at 5 or 7 yards or whatever it is. Still gives you that up close hold, and then everything beyond that is really close to your normal 50-yard zero anyways. But you get a much smaller optic. You get something that can co-witness with iron sight, so you don't need to run something offset. And of course you get that better, more true 1x. However, again, if you have an astigmatism, if you have a need for a prism style optic and you want the best prism 1x style optic that you can, for this is fairly fast, and especially when in conjunction with a riser, it was very comfy to use, it was very easy to use, picking up very quickly. However, it's basically like a smaller LPVO on 1x. It does have a really good field of view. The reticle is good, it's fast, easy to pick up, very precise with the center chevron, so you can use that triangle aiming point. Overall, very good optic for what it is. It's just a little too niche for me and probably for most people, though I would not say that it is a bad option. Now, I know that SwampFox is coming out with a more micro style 1x prism that's going to be taking like T2 mount, so a more universal mounting pattern, and that one there is definitely going to have some advantages over this one: size, weight, mount compatibility, all that sort of stuff, but it's still going to have the same downsides: not being able to really co-witness iron sights through it, not having the best 1x like a red dot, which is much more of a actual true 1x than a prism optic. No matter how good you get the prism optic, you're still curving light through a bunch of different pieces of glass and not actually looking at the actual image. So very cool. Tanky optic, does have some shift in zero when dropped. A decent price for a prism optic. It's still fast, it's still usable. If you need something that has an etched reticle, there's no reason not to pick one of these up. But again, if you're not one of those people, you're probably better off with a red dot or an LPVO, something that can flex into a lot more roles. One last thing that I haven't mentioned, and I know I'm kind of beating this to death, but you can't use a magnifier with this prism optic. So with this prism optic, does not play well with any magnifiers that I've tested. On any distance, any setup, does not really work well together versus a regular red dot. You can throw a 3x magnifier behind it and you get that much better positive ID on your targets. You get a little bit closer and hopefully allow you to be a little bit more precise. So that is just about it for the video, guys. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think of prism optics in general. If there's some other brand or type that I should check out in the future, go ahead and let me know, guys. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace off.